Hey there, macro folks. This is Mr. Hooker, and this is chapter 15 and video 2. Let's get on into the action. Now, expansionary monetary policy, just like expansionary fiscal policy, the goal is to put money in people's pockets so that they will spend it. That is really it. Restrictive monetary policy, just to take money out of people's pockets so they just can't spend it. That's really all we're doing. So if the economy faces a recession, we're going to lower the target for the federal funds rate. The Fed's going to purchase bonds. Remember, if they purchase bonds, that puts money into institutions or people's hands. And then we've expanded the money supply. And there's downward pressure on other interest rates. We're trying to make money cheap. Interest rates are the cost of money. We're trying to make money cheap so that people will go out, borrow money, spend said money. Restrictive monetary policy. We got periods of rising inflation, seeing that now, 2023 summer. Increases the federal funds rate, decreases the money supply, increases the other interest rate. Okay, trying to raise the interest rate so people look at it and go, that stuff looks expensive. People and businesses, that looks expensive. Maybe we shouldn't be spending this money. Okay, so if y'all slow down the spending, maybe prices go down. So expansionary monetary policy effects. Problem is unemployment and recession. Positive forward guidance, lower federal funds target rate, reductions on interest on reserve balances, and reverse reserve repos, and or quantitative easing. Money supply goes up, interest rates fall, investment spending increases, aggregate demand increases, real GDP goes up. That's the goal, right? Um, Restrictive monetary policy effects. We've got a problem of inflation, negative forward guidance, like the sky is falling kind of stuff, higher federal funds target rate, increase on interest on reserve balances, and on RRPs, reverse reserve repos, and or quantitative tightening. Money supply falls, interest rates go up, investment spending goes down, aggregate demand goes down, inflation goes down. That's the goal. So, monetary policy, the evaluation and the issues. The advantage of the monetary policy over fiscal policy, it is faster and it is more flexible. The board of governors and the all those folks, the chair, the Federal Open Market Committee, and all the presidents, they can meet as often as it happens. We have an emergency, hey, they can call a meeting. Everybody can be in Washington anytime. So that is really quick. They can come up with a solution. They can have a meeting. I mean, they meet quarterly anyway, but if something happens, they'll meet more often. They've got isolation from political pressure. I've mentioned before, like, for for fiscal policy, job number one for politicians is to get reelected. And so they've got that political pressure. These cats, they're not worried. They know they can only serve one term. So we're going to do 14 years and then we're going to do what we do. Um, so we're going to do what's best for the economy, and then we're going to worry about other stuff. Monetary policy is more subtle than fiscal policy. It's not like using a hammer to chase a gnat. We're going to be a little more subtle with the way we do this. So some recent U.S. monetary policy, the mortgage default crisis. We responded with quick and innovative actions during the 07-08 financial crisis and severe recession, kept short-term interest rates low using a zero interest rate policy, or a ZERP, purchased debt securities at pre-crisis prices so financial firms wouldn't have to sell at current panic prices. And then the 2010s recovery. By 09, slow recovery was underway, and zero lower bound problems meant short-term interest rates were as low as possible. We had quantitative easing and quantitative tightening. The 2020 COVID recession, COVID-related mandatory lockdowns were a grave economic threat. The Fed addressed it with forward guidance, lowered the federal funds target range, used administered rates, reinitiated quantitative easing, and the recession was the shortest on record. Now, what are some problems? Monetary policy faces both limitations and complications. There are recognition and operational lags. The fact that we got to recognize there's a problem, and the operational lag is pretty much based on how often do you really go to the bank to borrow money, right? There's also cyclical asymmetry. You got to time this thing right. If you time this wrong, you may be putting money into the economy when we are on the uptick rather than on the downside. Like instead of in a recession, we may be coming out of the recession and you just throw more money into the economy, and that is not what we want. And then you could get a liquidity trap, which is not really good. So money in there that's not really, so basically we're spending money or we're basically spending money that really shouldn't be there, and that causes problems, or saving money that really shouldn't be there. You really want the money to have a purpose. So all money should have a purpose. It should be like I saved, I spent, I saved, I spent. If you just give people money to do things, then you end up with liquidity traps. So the Fed is not omnipotent. Sometimes monetary policy must be augmented with fiscal policy, as they've done in the recent recessions, a lot of Keynesian stuff. So we do have a new inflationary era. The U.S. labor force began shrinking after the 07-08 recession, and that accelerated following the COVID recession. So labor shortages drove up labor costs and pushed the supply curve to the left. And normally it's always going to move right, but now it's moving left, and that's not normal. So this reversal of global supply chain practices also drove up costs. So the rising energy costs also contributed to inflationary concerns. So your big picture on the supply side, input prices, productivity, and legal institutional environment are aggregate supply. CI, G, and NX are going to give you aggregate demand, and that gives us the levels of output, employment, income, and prices. So the Taylor rule is the policy rule proposed by John Taylor and suggests how the Fed would adjust the nominal interest rate as it pursues the dual mandate. So it's based on the idea that if forced to make a choice between inflation being too high and employment being too high, bankers always err on the side of inflation being too high. So more specifically, the Taylor rule assumes the Fed cares twice as much about hitting its full employment goal as it does about hitting its inflation goal. So mathematically, we define a few things. The inflation gap is the current actual rate of inflation minus the Fed's 2% target rate for inflation. Unemployment gap is the current actual unemployment rate minus the Fed's 3.5% target rate for unemployment. And the real risk-free interest rate is 2%. So the Fed target interest rate is real risk-free interest rate plus the current actual inflation rate plus 0.5 times the inflation gap minus 0.1 times the unemployment gap. So the 1 coefficient in front of unemployment is twice as large as the 0.5 in front of the inflation gap. So that's why we're saying that they care twice as much about employment as they do inflation. So the Taylor rule shows why the Fed initiated quantitative easing to recover from the recession in 07-09. Inflation was negative 0.36%. Unemployment was 10%. So assuming an inflation target of 2% and a natural rate of unemployment of 3.5, the effective federal funds rate suggests Taylor rule was a negative 6.04. So people would have been converting their money into cash, causing multiple economic problems. All right. That is it for everything. Everybody have a great semester. Take care. We'll talk to you later. Bye now.